The story of humanity has always been filled with voices struggling to be heard, hearts yearning to be seen, and identities fighting to exist. Among those voices, there is one community whose journey has been both extraordinary and heartbreaking: the LGBTQ community. To understand them, we must first travel back in time, back to a world that refused to even speak their name. A world that taught millions to hide, to whisper, to erase themselves in fear of punishment, rejection, or even death. But like every truth, theirs could not be buried forever. And this is the story of that long, painful, and powerful journey. In ancient civilizations, there were moments of freedom. In parts of Greece and Rome, same-gender love was not hidden but woven into the very fabric of culture, poetry, and even philosophy. Yet as centuries turned, religions rose, and societies hardened, that acceptance began to vanish. What was once love became branded as sin. What was once poetry became condemned as crime. And so began the silence. A silence that stretched for hundreds of years, trapping countless lives in the shadows. But silence is not the absence of truth. It is only the waiting. And in every era, there were those who dared to whisper, those who dared to live, those who dared to love against all odds. They were punished, mocked, and erased from history. Yet they existed. They survived. And survival is the first form of resistance. The Middle Ages were brutal for anyone who dared to live differently. Across Europe, same-sex relationships were punished by imprisonment, torture, or execution. The laws were cruel, but the fear was crueler. Many were forced into loveless marriages, living double lives, suffocating under masks they never chose. In silence, they cried. In silence, they wrote letters that could never be mailed. In silence, they loved in secret corners of the world. And when they were caught, society showed no mercy. But history is not only cruelty, it is also resilience. Even in those dark times, art, literature, and culture carried hidden symbols of queer love. In Shakespeare's sonnets, in the letters of soldiers, in the portraits that dared to paint forbidden affection, the truth kept breathing, quietly, patiently, waiting for its day. Centuries passed, but the chains of shame and persecution remained. Then came the 19th and early 20th centuries, a time when science tried to explain what religion had condemned. Doctors, psychologists, and lawmakers debated whether being gay was an illness, a disorder, or a crime. And yet, while the world debated, the LGBTQ community lived. They built secret networks, underground bars, and hidden meeting places where, for a few hours, they could dance, laugh, and exist without fear. These small sanctuaries were the beating heart of resistance. But they could never remain safe for long. Police raids, public shaming, and arrests destroyed many of these fragile havens. And then came the wars. During World War II, countless LGBTQ individuals served with courage, only to return home to rejection. Many nations criminalized them, even as they wore medals for bravery. Imagine fighting for your country, only to be told you were never worthy of belonging to it. This was the paradox of their existence. Heroes on the battlefield, criminals in their own homes. But every storm creates a movement, and the LGBTQ community was ready. The mid-20th century was a turning point. The world was changing. People were rising against oppression in every form: civil rights, women's rights, anti-colonial struggles. And within this wave, LGBTQ voices began to grow louder. They were tired of whispers. They were tired of shame. They wanted to be free. And then came a night that would change history forever: the Stonewall riots of 1969. In New York City, at a small bar called the Stonewall Inn, police carried out yet another raid, humiliating and arresting LGBTQ patrons. But this time, something broke. The people fought back. They refused to be silent. For days, protests filled the streets, led by trans women of color, drag queens, and youth who had been discarded by society. Their anger became fire. Their fire became a movement. And from that fire, pride was born. Stonewall was not the first protest, but it was the spark that lit the world. From New York to San Francisco, from London to Berlin, the LGBTQ rights movement began to march, to chant, to demand. We are here. We are human. We will not be erased. But every victory was met with backlash. In the 1980s, the AIDS crisis struck like a nightmare. Thousands of gay men fell sick, and instead of compassion, society responded with hatred. They called it the gay plague. Governments looked away. Families abandoned their children. Hospitals turned away the sick. It was genocide by neglect. But even in this darkness, the LGBTQ community turned grief into action. Organizations like ACT UP rose to fight, to demand medical research, to scream into the silence that every life mattered. Their activism forced the world to face the truth, to care, to fight the epidemic. By the 1990s and 2000s, the world had begun to shift. Laws changed. Countries decriminalized same-sex love. Activists won the right to marry, to adopt, to live without fear of arrest. Pride parades became global celebrations of resistance and love. For the first time in centuries, millions could walk openly in the sunlight, holding the hands of those they loved. And yet, the struggle was far from over. Even today, in many countries, being LGBTQ is still a crime. In many families, it is still a shame. In many religions, it is still a sin. Countless young people are bullied, beaten, or even driven to take their own lives because they cannot bear the weight of society's hatred. The fight is not just in the past. It is happening now in this very moment. But here is the truth that history has always shown. You cannot erase love. You cannot destroy identity. And you cannot silence truth forever. The LGBTQ community is not just a group of people. It is a movement of courage, of resilience, of beauty. It is artists, leaders, parents, children, teachers, doctors, neighbors, and friends. It is the spirit of every person who has ever dared to say, "This is who I am, and I will not hide." And so the story continues. The fight is not over. The victories are not complete. But the journey proves one thing above all. When humanity chooses compassion over cruelty, love over hate, truth over lies, then and only then do we all win. So the question remains, what side of history will you stand on? Will you be the silence that crushes, or the voice that uplifts? Will you join the march for equality, or will you remain in the shadows of prejudice? Because the next chapter of this story is not written yet. It belongs to you, to me, to us. And if this story touched your heart, if it made you think, if it made you feel even for a moment the pain and the power of this journey, then do not let it end here. Be part of the change. Share this story. Speak for those who cannot. And most importantly, subscribe to this channel so together we can keep telling the stories that matter, the stories that change hearts, the stories that refuse to be silenced. Because history is watching, the future is listening, and the world is waiting for voices like yours. So subscribe now, and let's write the next chapter together.